Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about Robert Adams and devotion. So let us begin. Adams begins by talking about a particular subject matter in ethics or the study of ethics, and he calls this the ethics of motives. And he situates the ethics of motives within a distinction between two different things that ethical theories do. And an ethical theory does something, namely, it tries to determine what actions are right and which actions are wrong. And he calls these the ethics of actions or the theories about the ethics of actions. Utilitarianism, is an example of this view, for example. It tells you which actions are right and which actions are wrong. That's the point of the ethical theory. Uh, Contrasted with that is the ethics of agents, and the kind of locus of the ethics of agents is not the action or the moral status of the action, at least not as such, but rather it is the persons themselves, and more importantly, what kind of persons it would be good to be. How to be a good person is the center of the ethics, the agent ethics, which is of course interconnected with the actions, but is not kind of grounded in the actions. And the two main kind of themes within ancient ethics are virtue ethics, or just talking about virtues and vices. And virtues and vices are habits or dispositions of characters of humans. So it is virtues or vices that define what kind of person one is. I mean, that's at the heart of virtue ethics, trying to figure out what kind of person one is. So, what kind of person it would be good to be is a virtuous agent, someone compassionate, benevolent, kind, courageous, temperate, and so on. And Adams points out, yeah, all of that's fine, fair and good. There is another subsection of agent ethics, however, that is not directly addressed by virtue ethics either, and that is the ethics of motives. The ethics of motives are essentially about trying to figure out what kind of a person is a good person, or what it would be for a person to be a good person. Here's how he defines a good motive. So, a good motive is one that contributes to the possessors being a good person. So, the very having of a good motive is kind of an excellence or a good thing that people have. So, the very having of the good motive is already an indication that something is going well with the kind of person that you are. This is not yet at the level of action. So, even before actions, the having of a good motive is already conducive to you being a good kind of person, or a bad habit being a bad kind of person. Sorry, a bad motive being a kind of bad kind of person, even if you don't yet act upon that. And here's kind of the main observation that Adams makes about this chapter. I believe that what and whom one loves and cares about, and how one goes about loving and caring about this what in this whom, is the most important factor in determining what kind of person one is ethically. So he's going as far as to claiming that having the good motives is more important in determining who you are than the virtues that you possess. Though he's going to say virtues and good motives are intertwined. So it's not that you can have the good motives and not the virtues at all, or not the actions at all. They're all going to come as a package. You have the good motives that leads to good actions, that leads to good habits, which are the virtues. So they're going to be a package. But there's a deep sense in which, claims Adams, it begins with the good motives, like the fountain of all of that cool story about becoming a good person is grounded in being a good having the good motives. Um, in this observation, this final observation, is also related to Augustine. So Augustine famously claimed that what defines you is that which you love. It is the object of your love that makes you who you are. In Adams is pretty much saying, yeah, Augustine is right. It is what you love that defines you. It's the kind of motives which are the way of loving that defines what kind of person you are. So that's the main topic for us. So here's the question. Okay, good motives are excellences that make a person a good person or contribute to a person becoming a good person. But what makes a motive a good motive versus a bad motive? And here's one possible answer. We might think, oh, a good motive is one that brings about good consequences in the world. That is utilitarianism, right? You assess the status of the motive as a good motive or bad motive on the basis of the goodness that it promotes in the world, right? Like actions. That's how you assess actions, claims the utilitarian. Likewise, you can be a motive utilitarian. You can think that what makes a motive a good motive is that it brings about consequences when you act on the basis of that motive, right? So it leads to the right action in that all of that is assessed in terms of consequences. So that's one possible story. That is not Adam's story, though. Adams thinks that consequences do matter. They're not the defining characteristic of good motives. It is rather the object of the motive that makes them good motives. So the object of the motive can be something like beauty, art, utility, virtue, God, friendship, relationships, careers, and so on. And it is really that is driving. It is the object of the motive that settles whether or not the motive is good. And here's how he puts it: good motives seek good ends. They're aimed at good things like beauty, art, virtue, God. And bad ones are aimed at bad things, selfishness, attacking others, racism. And it is really the object of the motive that makes it a good object, a good motive or a bad motive. And in this context, he's going to say that a good motive we can call a love. You love someone, you have a good motive towards that someone or that something like beauty. So a good motive is a kind of love. We can call it a kind of love. And in this context, he makes a distinction between mere likes or mere tastes and loves. And here are a couple of different ways of distinguishing a mere like or preference or a taste for something or someone, and love for that something or that someone. So a mere taste is rarely, if ever, an excellence in he who possesses them. That is, if you like something, that doesn't count, or at least typically the vast majority of the cases, doesn't count as something good that you possess. It's not an excellence. It doesn't make you a good person that you like something that is in general, even if what you like is good. Whereas to love something that is good is to have a good motive, and that is something that makes you a better person. That contributes to being a good person, or loving something that is bad contributes to being a bad person. So loves are more serious than mere likes or desires. They speak more to more profound things, more important things. They engage more the self. They're not mere kind of side things you do understand, mere side preferences or tangential kind of things. They get to the core of who you are. And they typically involve attending or paying attention to caring about the object and the ways of relating to the object, the thing you care about, the thing you love, whether it be a person or again, beauty, something more abstract. To love beauty is to take beauty seriously, to define yourself, to the source of the self in a way that beauty plays a role in who you are, and to pay attention to beauty itself or things that are beautiful in the way that you relate to those, so you become an artist. And if you merely like beauty, like those more deep connections are not going to be there, and that's what distinguishes true love or love as a motive from mere likes. So there is a major debate in this kind of literature about the role of different values and the way in which those different values, which are the objects of your motives, the way in which they lay claim on your behavior. And that has been called the fragmentation of value. So there's this topic, fragmentation of value, that talks about how different values, things like beauty, family, career, God's fulfillment, again, the objects of good motives, how they have different demands on your behavior. And some people argue that that the value is fragmented. All of these values, beauty, family, career, and so on, they provide different motivations for different career paths, for different actions, and they're just irreconcilable. They're incommensurable. There's no way of putting them together. You must just choose one or the other. But there's no like reasonable way of arranging the different demands of these values on you, on your behavior, on your life. Uh, Values fragmented. There are different pieces pulling in different directions, but that's it. Like we're kind of stuck in this dilemma of the fragmentation of value. Adams does not think so. Adams thinks that value is ultimately integrated. In fact, he argues that his view, ultimately grounded in God, Christian God, is one of the benefits of the view. One of the reasons for that commends his view is that it is able to provide an integrated conception of value, of the objects of good motives, in the way in which they kind of make claim in our behavior. So he thinks that integration of value, that's the contrast with the fragmentation of value, uh, it's a good thing, that it is something that is to be aspired, in that his view is going to give you an account of that. And there's going to be both a subjective element of the integration of value and an objective element to the integration of value. Here's the subjective element. So the subjective element is kind of psychological, it's how you feel, it's introspectively available. It is a kind of unity, or at least lack of dissonance, lack of tension, in war between different but incompatible good motives, right? It's about your motivational life. You have this love of art, this love of country, this love of family, love of career, and so on. In the way in which they're interplaying your psychology, you are and you have a value, your value psychology is integrated when there is no war or tension between those. There's a kind of hierarchy, there's a structure, there's an intelligible order to those loves, to those good motives. And here's how Adams puts it: there's a system to your motives, and the system must have enough order that there can be facts. So there are facts about what is most important to you, and on the basis of comparing those different values, right? So you have love of art, country, and family, but to have an integrated psychology of good motives is to know which one is more important to you, which one's more valuable to you, and to, on the basis of that, act accordingly. There's no war between your psychology about the values that are driving you to different directions. There's organization, there's integrity, and that is the psychological state of the integration of value within you. So the subjective integration of value requires a general framework or system of values that enables an agent to make decisions and compromises between the different demands of these good motives. There will be some times in which your love of art might be at odds with your love of country or your love of family. And if you have an integrated psychology, then you would be able to negotiate smoothly without tension, without stress, without depression, how to allocate your resources, how to behave, how to, what to give preference to what in that particular case. So the system of values would enable you to navigate the world, doing justice to all of these values and your motives, your commitment to these values. So such decisions must be ones in which I can reasonably be at peace with myself. In other words, if you're in a particular case in which your love of country is pushing you one way, your love of family in a different way, and you just don't know, you just choose something and you regret it later and so on, you lack the integrated psychology, right? The integrated psychology is one in which those values, those motives are structured and ordered in the right way that you can identify which one is the thing you should do and then kind of live in peace with it. You realize that you had to sacrifice your love of country, but hey, it was because of your love of your family, which was more important. And then you're fine there, right? So your inner psychology is not a fluctuating battleground between your motives. There has to be this integration of the motives. And that's an important part of the whole picture of integration of value. That's something we should all aspire to, claims Robert Adams. His main target is not that internal psychological ordering or unity. It's really the objective side. It's the side of values in the world, and whether or not they are in fact compatible or they're fragmented, right? They are opposing each other. And he thinks they are compatible. And one of the beauties of his account, Grounded in God, is that you can understand how they're compatible, how they're integrated. All of the goods in the world do not compete. So here's what he says. On the objective side, value can be integrated by loving goodness as such. So the main move in his account is that one need not be attention with the different demands of values if one loves goodness as such. So the primal drive of the good agent is to love goodness as such. Everything that is good to the extent that it is good. So in loving goodness as such, one would thereby love, at least in principle, everything that is good to the extent that it is good. That single attitude is going to unify the psychological element, but it's also going to track the objective side of the value, the integration of value in the objective world. Adams is a theist, so he thinks that goodness as such just is the nature of God, just is God. So for the theist, it is love of God that is going to organize, that is going to structure, integrate all of the other loves, all of the other values in a way in which it provides the unity that we've been speaking of. So for the theist, loving God, both as the object of love and as an ally in loving all things that are lovable, the goodness as such, because God loves everything that is good. And loving God, we would be loving that which God loves, which would be everything that is good to the extent that it is good. So God becomes this kind of prism through which everything that is good becomes lovable by loving God. That's the main thesis here. That's the main thesis at the heart of the Christianity, at least main Christian thinkers have endorsed it. And is the thing that Adams is going to try to tease out in a little bit more detail. So here's the question. How do we how can one be both maximally devoted to God? How can be unconditional love for God, but also devoted to some other things, and say one's neighbor? This is the classic tension in Christian theology about the first commandment, love God before or else, and the second main commandment that Jesus provides of loving thy neighbor as thyself. Uh, some people, some critics have seen a lot of tension there. How can you completely love God but yet have extra love to love others? Like it seems that those commandments are in tension. In this story, the integration of value is a way of bringing them together with no tension. And, this tension, of course, is not new. So Augustine addressed that, and here's Augustine's resolution of the tension of the two main commandments in Christianity. Augustine makes a distinction between enjoying and using. In enjoying is to rejoice. Well, here's what he says, quote, to enjoy is to cling with love to something for its own sake. So to enjoy something is to love it for its own sake, not for the sake of something else, and to kind of cling to it, to possess it, and enjoys the having of that thing that you love for its own sake. Whereas to use it is to apply what is used to the obtaining of that which you love. So to use is to treat as a means for the sake of something else that you love and that you do enjoy. So you enjoy when that's the end in itself. You love something for what it is, for who it is, for its own sake. And to use is to treat as means, to love as means for the thing that you give us. You can say that you love money, but you love money because of the things it gives you, like safety, security, education, things like that. And those are the things, safety, security, education, are things you love for their own selves. So those are things you enjoy. That's the rough model here. And Augustine applies this model to the love of God versus love of neighbor. And here's what Augustine says: God is to be enjoyed, love for its own sake, and every other finite being, so everything else, every finite good, is to be used for the sake of enjoying God. So you love yourself, your career, your spouse, your children, family, your country. You love them as a means to loving and enjoying God, right? So finite goods are means to love God ultimately, claims Augustine. Adams is not happy with this picture. He thinks that gives up on love or finite goods altogether. So here's what he says: this is not a successful solution to the problem because it does not allow for anything that really deserves the name of love of one's neighbor or for any other finite thing. In other words, Adams' criticism of Augustine is that Augustine's account of love for neighbor or love of finite goods really is not love. It's something else. It's like when I say I love money, but what I mean is, oh, money gives me safety, security, and education. Say, I don't really love money. I love the things that money gives me, which are lovable. But money itself shouldn't be loved. I mean, love does not seem to be the right word here, claims Adams. Not anything worthy of the name love is something that you, quote, love for the sake of something else. If you love something, you must love it for itself, not for something else. And that's what's happening with Augustine. So Augustine's account, claims Adams, is not a good account. Adams' account is going to do better. And so again, at the heart of it is loving God unconditionally, or absolute, complete devotion to God, or to goodness as such if you're not a believer, but goodness as such will do. And here's a cool quote from Adams. A good person will have a general disposition to value things that are good, right? That's the heart of the unifying theme. And not to value the badness of anything as such, right? So this fundamental attitude is that anything that is good, you love. Anything that is not good, that is bad, you don't love. Like badness is not lovable. This does not mean that she will actually love every good thing that crosses in her path. There's too many good things that cross one's path to actually love them. So it's something slightly different. That would be beyond the physical and psychic resources of mere mortals. But she will have a quite general disposition that would blossom into love for some good things and the liking of others, and at least with respect for most things that catch her attention. In other words, this commitment to loving goodness as such is not actually loving goodness as such, but a disposition to love anything that presents itself as good in your path. In that disposition need not be actualized with every single thing that comes your path. But it does mean that when something good comes your path and you pay attention, it starts to blossom, right? You start noticing, you appreciate the good, you start caring for the good, and so on. For every single thing that is good, that disposition must be there, and that's the ground of unifying of value. And here's the more kind of careful way in which Adams puts it. The objective side of the integration of value is united in love of God. And here's how he puts it, or goodness as such, if you're not atheist. To be maximally devoted to God, or goodness as such, is to have a disposition to love anything that is good to the extent that is good. You see a flower, you see a person, you see, something that is valuable, has some goodness. To have this fundamental attitude of love for the good as such, or for God, is to recognize the good there and to appreciate it as such and to love it as such. Again, it is the disposition. You cannot stop to look at all the flowers. There are too many flowers. But it is this, in principle, you're not just going to stample upon the flower because you don't care. If you just destroy goods because you don't care, you do not have this disposition. So now let's apply it to enjoying God and enjoying everything else. So Adams thinks that Augustine's story about using things for the sake of God, for loving God, that's mistaken. One must be able to enjoy things in themselves, if that enjoyment is to count as love. He goes further. He says that we can come to love God in finite things by seeing finite goods as an imitation of God. He's a traditional theist, so he thinks that everything that is good by participating, by resembling, by imitating goodness as such, which is God. So the beauty of the flower, the goodness of the flower, is in some sense a resemblance of an image of God. And that is what makes it be good. So in loving finite things for their own sake, we're also enjoying and loving God himself, claims Adams. So to be good is to resemble absolute goodness, that is God. We can rejoice in God by rejoicing in a finite good. So instead of the Augustine that to love God is to merely use finite goods for the sake of God, uh, Adams goes kind of to the opposite extreme of saying that we can love God in the loving of any and every good in the world that God made. Because it is good, because it resembles God. We see the kind of the footprint of God, as it were. To be good is to be like God. In the goodness that we appreciate, we see God. And in loving it, we love God. And here's a long quote that appeals to the Christian spirit. So, quote, Isaiah, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The glory of God of which the earth is full is presumably present in ordinary as well as extraordinary phenomena. What interests me here is the structure of seeing and enjoying the glory of God in such a phenomena, that is, in physical things and finite things. There are two essential moments in it. One is the moment of enjoying and admiring the creative phenomena. You recognize the goodness in the creative phenomena. The light, the light on the leaves, right, for what it is in itself, right? So the first moment you appreciate the goodness of things for what they are. Uh, the other is a moment in which the created good is seen as a fragmentary or pointing beyond itself, a moment in which we take as constituent of the glimpse of the transcendent good object, dim awareness of something too wonderful to be contained or carried either by our experiences or by the finite objects we are perceiving. So that's more loaded terminology to mean something like we see God, the goodness and the finite thing that we appreciate and love for itself becomes something that points to the transcendent reality that is God, in virtue of which the thing is good. Um, to be good is to resemble God, and we see that. That's the second moment. Oh, it's not just a beautiful flower; it's the beauty, the goodness of the flower that points to this fundamental reality that is goodness itself. And it is in that second moment that we go from merely loving the flower as such to loving the flower as a way of loving God Himself as such. I believe there are many experiences, particular experiences of beauty, that have this bipartite structure. In other words, Adams is saying that our experience of finite things can become a window to our experience of God through that finite thing, and we can love God by loving that finite thing. So here's the final thing for today. So traditional theism, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, it's not pantheism, right? So it's not like God himself that we're seeing in the flower is not quite that. It can't quite be that because it would be pantheism, not traditional theism. However, there's this doctrine of divine immanence. God is in things in some sense. And it is this divine immanence that Adams is appealing to. There's enough immanence to support speaking of enjoying God and enjoying created goods, claims Adams. The integration of value is the fundamental commitment to God or goodness as such. That is a disposition to treat, accept, and love everything that is good to the extent that it is good. And in fact, it goes to the extent of enjoying goodness as such or God as such in every finite thing that is good, like flowers, people, benevolent kinds, kinds, and so on. Okay, I'll stop here. See you next time.